What's up, everybody? Welcome to Off the Rails, a podcast dedicated to ending the stigma of addiction through open discussion on all things recovery related. My name is Mark, and with me always are Dave and Jared. And today we have a very special guest, and Jared's going to introduce her.
Yes, today we have Samantha Clement, if I said that right. So Sam's with us today to talk about family addiction issues and all things recovery. She works at Newgate as an addictions counselor and is actually Dave and I's relapse preventionist. So we're very excited to have her on.
Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm super pumped.
Thanks for joining us. So Sam, as I was telling you before, we're doing segments for shooting the professional shit, where we bring professionals on, such as yourself, and we're able to provide resources for people struggling or people that have family members struggling. And, myself, Dave, and Jared, we're just going through it, and we want to, be able to bring on professional guests and give people accurate information. So that being said, can you tell us a bit about yourself and, what kind of got you interested in this field of work?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So a little bit about me. I've been at Newgate for about 5 years now. Started kind of as a base level addictions counselor and worked my way up. My passions really lie with relapse prevention, but also with the families. I've come in contact with a lot of individuals in my life who suffer from addiction, stemming through family lines, friend circles, professional contacts. So straight out of the gate, I've been in the social work field for many years, but my interest in addiction stems from, not being in recovery myself, but the people that I've touched in the lives that I've been involved in. So love those individuals very deeply and wanted a way to kind of help others that are in similar positions as well.
Okay, guys. So one amazing thing about Newgate is Newgate has like an incredible family program. And I've been to another facility other than Newgate, and they had nothing close to this. So Sam, could you kind of tell us about Newgate's family program that you guys offer and how that is helpful?
Of course. So the basis of our program here at Newgate is built around the idea that addiction is a family disease. So what I mean by that is that although many in early recovery or in active addiction will feel that their addiction was a private matter, but unfortunately, regardless of whether we intend it to or not, there's this ripple effect that happens where the effects touch the whole family. Our program here aims to provide education about addiction, education about resources, as well as the foundation for family members to begin building their own support systems and begin their own healing process. So as their loved ones are transitioning into early recovery, now the family can do so as well. I'm a firm believer in the idea that as somebody in active addiction gets sicker, so does the family. So in order for somebody to have a successful recovery of their own, it means that the family needs to actually start getting better alongside the individual in recovery as well. So our program in itself, we offer weekly education sessions, an ongoing support call for those who have those families whose loved one are no longer in the residential program, so that they can continue to connect with each other, share their successes and their challenges in early recovery. But they're also able to then continue the psychoeducation process, take a little bit away, and get ongoing referrals to resources that might be helpful to them in their home communities as well.
One thing that I liked when I was at Newgate, well, I didn't like it at the time, but I'm very happy about it now, is it's the family Pro Questionnaire. It's really hard. You got to go through it and read it. And it's hard at the time, but it actually wakes you up and realizes what you're doing is affecting people more than you actually think. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Of course. So one of the pieces while our clients are here in house, is that their family has an opportunity to fill in something that we call the family questionnaire. This questionnaire touches on the things that they've observed with their loved one who's in active addiction and the concerns that they have for their well being moving forward. But it also gives them an opportunity and a way to appropriately voice how they've been affected by their loved one's addiction mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So they get an opportunity to speak their truth and to do so in a supportive environment where there's now um, a counselor in the room who can help them process this, as well as the person who's entering into early recovery. Next, this allows open communication and stating of boundaries, expectations, and improving or beginning to mend relationships moving forward. It's an incredibly hard process to go through, but so beneficial, as you stated, Jared. I mean, you've been in the position. It opens a lot of doors for you within the family environment.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoy that I did it now, but at the time it was very difficult.
Yeah.
um, Now, what about what do you think about families asking? Like, I know I don't even like to hear about booze or drugs or anything, but what would you say to families that are always on high alert and are if you're a little bit off one day, they think you're like, they straight up call you out on it. And then it's I don't know, when that happens to me, I kind of feel like, what's the point of even doing this if everyone's going to think I'm drinking and doing drugs still? So what would you say to a family member that is, I don't know, accusing or doesn't have the trust yet in the person? Do you think there's a better way to go about communicating that, or how do you think?
But I want to dissect this in a couple of different ways, Jared, if you don't mind. So
Yep.
the first is that I understand where it's coming from. I mean, oftentimes when a loved one is entering into early recovery, the family has been stretched to a limit. They've gone through hell and back just trying to survive their loved one's addictions and the feelings that they're feeling. So when they see their loved one possibly having an off day or returning and slipping into an old behavior that they once had while they were actively using, that is that gut reaction which develops over time as a survival tactic within that family, right? This is something that we call a homeostasis. We all strive for this balance in the survival within the family unit. So when something pings our radar and seems familiar, as families, we've adapted to some maladaptive behaviors to help us survive, which can be policing behaviors, accusing, going to worst case scenario, feeling a lot of anxiety, hurt, stress, all of those things that come with when our loved one was in active use. So when we see this displayed, it's an instantaneous response that we might not even realize that we're doing as family members. So with that in mind, when I talk to families about this, I often challenge them to examine that response that they have and why it's occurring, and getting their own support systems in place to be able to help them change those responses. Maybe it's journaling so that they can be more in tune with themselves and their emotions and why they're getting there. It can be talking to a counselor to be able to examine their own feelings and break down the hurts associated with that. And it can be coming back to the 3 C's of Al-Anon, which is recognizing that we're holding on to, control or accountability for our loved one's recovery. The 3 C's of Al-Anon are you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. By trying to practice these 3 C's on an ongoing basis, we're getting rid of the shame, blame, guilt, and the expectation that our loved one's success is bound by our actions, right? So oftentimes what I ask loved ones to do, instead of skipping straight to the accusation of, are you drinking? Are you using? Are you gambling? I ask them to simply ask, are you okay? What's going on today? Using I statements can be really helpful here. So, I see that you're really irritable today. This is how I feel about it, right? It's making me anxious when you're irritable. Is there anything I can do to help you today? Um, Oftentimes, you're right, Jared. If you're getting those accusations coming at you, it can be really hard to maintain that hope and that follow through to remain sober, right? Especially when we feel like we're not regaining the trust that we need to in those family relationships. I think there's also an understanding that's needed on both sides about the fact that trust is gradual in early recovery. It's not something that is built in 5 days, 30 days, 2 months. It's something that takes a long time to reestablish. And if both sides can understand that, then some of that pressure is also taken off.
I love that answer.
So as I mentioned, I brought up the idea of this episode to my sister, and her face like lit up, and she was super excited. So first, like, if you have a family member, Sam, that you suspect is struggling, with their substance abuse or alcohol, how do you think is the best way to kind of approach that situation and kind of tell them that something's going on?
Well, love and empathy goes a really, really long way, right? Letting your loved one know that you're there to talk, having that open communication, and again, coming back to those I statements. Oftentimes, when we're concerned, we can go into the you. You are doing this. You are doing that. I see this. I see that. And oftentimes that can cause us actually to get our backs up and not want to open up to our loved ones, because there's a lot of blame happening during that, whether we intended to or not. If we can come back to the fundamentals of owning our emotions, owning our responses and what we're seeing, that makes it a lot more of an open area to discuss. So, Mark, I see that you're struggling right now. I've seen a lot of changes in your behavior, and as a loved one, I'm wondering what that's about, or is there anything I can help with, right? That's a lot softer of a conversation to have, that opens more doors than, you're doing this, you're doing that, this is not acceptable, right? The other thing is that if you don't have that closeness with your loved one and you know that they don't want to talk to you, come armed in your conversation with some resources for them, right? They might not want to open up to Grandma Sue because they don't want to feel the disappointment that they perceive might happen in having that conversation. But if Grandma says, you know what, I think there's a counselor that would be really great to talk to, there's more of an onus that the loved one will follow through and go see this counselor, not only because Grandma Sue wants it, but also that that's a safe space for them to talk.
Sam, when you talk about, I know you don't like the word enabling, so you can maybe discuss on that as far as like boundaries. But at what point, when someone's struggling and loved ones have tried different approaches, do you start to set up maybe harder boundaries for that person who's struggling, or is it kind of boundaries should be set early on and then just get more kind of stricter as it goes? Or that might be a loaded question, I don't know, but
that's okay. I love loaded questions. I love a challenge. Yeah, you're very right. I really dislike the word enabling, and it's a word that's used a lot in the addiction culture. But it holds such a negative connotation for family members, because at the end of the day, we're doing the best that we have, or we can, with what we have, right? A lot of the time, what we're doing is we're trying to survive alongside our loved one. And oftentimes, the compromises that we're making or the boundaries that we pre-established that we're backing down from is out of fear for our loved one's survival or keeping that connection alive between us, right? Instead, I like to use the word anchoring. Our behavior anchors us where we are, right? And it's not necessarily always a positive place that we're being anchored to, but it's a lot less negative of a term. Now, you mentioned it, boundaries. Boundaries are the direct way to start to counteract that um, enabling or anchoring behavior that we'd see. Um, so, with the boundaries, I mean, it's really hard to establish when and how we should put them up. But I think to establish boundaries, the first place to start is re examining our own values and our own emotional needs as loved ones. Um, Boundaries are a huge motivator to move our loved one forward, but they have to be mutually beneficial. Boundaries can't just work for one person, they have to have something for everybody that they're being set for. So those boundaries, might be set around our time, our emotions. It might be around our self care, our physical self, and we're going to bring them up as needs present for them. But the thing with boundaries is that if we're going to set something, it needs to be something that we're willing to follow through on. Typically, as loved ones, with a loved one in active addiction, we have a track record of setting boundaries that we don't follow through on. So when our loved one, we're trying to move them towards change or we're trying to support them in early recovery, it's natural for loved ones to start testing those boundaries to see if they're going to hold up. So if we can't commit to whatever consequence or boundary it's going to be, we shouldn't set it. We can only do what we're comfortable with. But through setting these boundaries, we're teaching other people how we should be treated and what our needs are. Oftentimes, that can be misconstrued with ultimatums. You do this or, right? And ultimatums never work. So there has to be an end game around ourselves with those. And it's often best to look at, is this a natural consequence for this? Is it something that is going to help us protect ourselves and for your loved one to learn from, and it's not going to be catastrophic? Or is this something that is like a life or death scenario, right? So with a natural consequence, it might be that I'm setting a boundary with my loved one because they call me intoxicated on a regular basis. And every time they're intoxicated and talk to me, they, yell and scream. And this is a bad scenario for both of us. I might move my loved one towards getting some help, but also protecting myself by stating, I'm not willing to talk to you on the phone when you're intoxicated. I also can't talk to you when you're yelling at me. Loved one may try it once, twice, but if I keep stating the boundary and the consequence of it, and I follow through on it, where I hang up the phone if they're intoxicated or if they're yelling at me, it's going to be far more respected. And the person on the other side is going to start to examine their behavior and how that needs to change, right? There's all different realms that you're going to want to set these for, but you need to base it first and foremost on your need and then how it motivates your loved one.
Like me, for instance, in early recovery, when I got out of Newgate, I had to set boundaries for going places, and I can't be around alcohol, nor do I want to be, or drugs. So I had to set these boundaries. Now, what would you say to like families that have had boundaries set for them, like, oh, I don't want you drinking while I'm going there for a visit? And like, I know not everyone has an issue with alcohol. So some people just don't understand addiction, I think. So I don't know, those boundaries are kind of hard to set when people don't understand, you know what I mean?
That actually touches on another point that I wanted to actually bring up on this, which is sober agreements, right? Sometimes we do have to set those boundaries, whether you're the person in recovery who's asking for a sober environment for yourself, or if you're family members who are trying to motivate your loved one for change and you're setting up a sober agreement for your home. At the end of the day, the idea for family members is that we want to place as many barriers between use as humanly possible. So, if we genuinely care about our loved one's sobriety, it is something that we are going to want to seriously look at, is providing that recovery oriented environment when your loved one visits, whether they're in recovery or in active addiction, right? So it might be, Jared, that you state that you need a sober home to visit, and that is completely within your means, right? It is completely safe to ask that it be sober for you. Otherwise, you can't visit, right? For a loved one who's trying to keep their loved one sober, locking up your wine cellar if you're a wine collector, or making sure that things aren't visible and they're put away, or simply clearing things out before your loved one visits, is a really intuitive way to keep them safe, right? One of the things that I often suggest for those in recovery is that if you can't trust that the environment that you're going into is going to be a safe one for you, invite others to your playground. Own the space, right? So if you're in a position where you're supposed to go visit Aunt Molly, and Aunt Molly doesn't understand addiction, and Aunt Molly's not going to put away her, wine collection for you, because she said, well, I don't have a problem, but you do. So it's your problem when you get here, right? Instead, what you might do is ask Aunt Molly into your house and just ask that Aunt Molly doesn't bring any drinks with her.
Because like some people don't understand it, and even like I still don't understand it. Like, how can I be like some days too? It's like all you're thinking about is alcohol or drugs or alcohol, and so people that don't think that way don't understand it. So it's like it's very hard to overcome addiction. So I think this podcast that we're doing today is going to be a really good one.
At the end of the day, I mean, I think a lot of family members are also afraid of the stigma that addiction, being a family disease, perpetuates within that family environment as well, right? Because one of the bases of the disease model is that there's a biological link between 40 and 50% of individuals who experience addiction have a family line and a genetic link to addiction in their ancestry. So with that in mind, many family members will kind of try and justify that, I'm not the one with an issue. I don't need to deal with this. And it's oftentimes that kind of protective stance around ourselves and where we're at. But on the flip side, we'll find a lot of family members are in support of ridding it from the environment. And what we find is that most are happy to set up that safe space. When I say a sober agreement, it doesn't mean sober around the clock. It doesn't mean that family members have to do the purge and get rid of alcohol or recreational drugs forever if they're not using it and abusing it. It just means that in the presence of your loved one who is recovering, or somebody you'd like to see going into recovery, we need to make this a safe space for them.
Sam, you previously mentioned blame, and I think a lot of people tend to blame themselves when they have a loved one in active addiction or in recovery. And if they're not blaming themselves, they're blaming someone else, and it can really like rip families apart. Can you kind of speak about that, and how, I guess, kind of how dangerous blame can be, and how like mentally, I guess, straining that could be on a loved one?
Blame is huge. Blame is the perpetuator of shame. And shame within ourselves, like there's a big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I did bad. Shame is I am bad. And what we find is that piece of shame is present in most relapses. It's present in most active addiction. It is kind of the catalyst for that behavior continuing and cycling forward. But as you stated, it's also a huge piece within the family environment. So blame is kind of that piece that allows us to hold something responsible for the shame that we feel on the inside as a response to the struggles that we're experiencing in our lives, whether it be our loved one's addiction or our own traumas that we carry along with us. And the thing is with shame is that, and there's a really, really great TED talk by Brene Brown on this. Shame can't survive when doused with empathy. So, one of the biggest things is to use that empathy as family members, trying to place ourselves in the position of our loved ones and understanding addiction as a disease and a survival tactic. Then we're able to kind of stop that association with stigma and with the shame within ourselves as well. Again, coming back to those 3 C's, we did not cause it. We do not cause our loved ones' addictions. Okay. And at the end of the day, we need to just take ownership for our own responses, our own actions, and our own self-care moving forward to begin dissecting the feelings and the shame and the blame that we're perpetuating with our loved ones as well. Right? Because you're right. It is so prevalent, it's so present, and it's so harmful to the family environment overall.
We watched that clip at Newgate, that Brene Brown, guilt and shame, and I really like that that clip. It. I think it's like 20 minutes. You can find it on YouTube, but I think she breaks it down like really, really easy, and I think it sinks home pretty well with me anyway. So.
Brene is brilliant. I highly suggest for any of the listeners today to take a look at that TED Talk on shame. I think regardless of whether your loved one's in addiction or not, it's super helpful.
Mark.
Yeah.
Curveball.
Yeah, what's happening?
I think my sister asked a question on YouTube on one of our videos. I just can't pull it up right now. But I thought that would be a good one to ask Sam.
Was it the link between mental health and addiction question?
Yeah.
Sam, so we had a question, and it was, is there a link between mental health and addiction? And can you kind of talk about that, or do you believe that?
So it's definitely a comorbidity, as we call it in the community. It's something that presents kind of on both sides. Most individuals that come into treatment at least have a little bit of mental health presenting. But it's often a question in the community of what came first, chicken or the egg. Often family members will ask, well, did the mental health create the addiction, or did the addiction create the mental health? And at this stage, it's hard to tell, but what we know in the community is that in order for there to be adequate treatment of mental health concerns, there needs to be stability with the addiction prior to. Oftentimes, now there's an understanding in the mental health community that we typically like to see 6 months to a year of sobriety before any mental health diagnosis is firmly given. There may be a working diagnosis that's closely monitored given before that. But the problem with addiction is that many of the symptoms of mental health are actually a byproduct of the depletion of serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain as, that byproduct of using and the release of chemicals. So it's that age-old debate, chicken, egg. But at the end of the day, in working on that addiction, you're improving your mental health exponentially.
Sam, earlier you mentioned like going to your loved one with resources, right? So like, here's what available off the top of your head. Could you kind of give us some resources that you could go to a loved one with?
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if people are widely kind of in the know of this, but there's a really valuable resource online called psychologytoday.com. Psychology Today will help you find counselors and therapists in your area, as well as support groups of all different sorts and sizes. by going into psychology today, you can toggle on to your local area. You can put in filters that pertain to certain topics or concerns. So you can toggle right on addiction in there, and it'll sort out the counselors or resources that are specified for that, and narrow down your search. Each kind of area also usually has an addictions and mental health services office, which is another really great place to start by placing a call and finding out what they have available, what wait lists look like, if there's any specialty programs so that you can take those to your loved one as well. And if in doubt, there's usually a code that you can call for your nearest city that works as a hotline that you can access social services as well. So in the Ottawa region, if you dial 311 or 211, oh God, that's horrible. I'm gonna have to fact check that one. I'm pretty sure it's 311. Then you can get on the line with an operator that can give you a breakdown of the services available to your loved one as well. Other resources available as well. So there's Al-Anon or Smart Recovery for Friends and Family, which are support groups available for family members that can help you kind of find out the resources in your area, as well as having supports for yourself and somebody else to talk through the scenario with. And they've got their sister groups, the main groups, which would be like AA or Smart Recovery, that you're, typically operate around the same time, so that you could potentially attend a meeting with your loved one and you go to your respective group and they go to theirs.
So fast forward, you get your loved one into recovery. And this one is, I think, really huge because you come into recovery and you kind of expect everything to be like peachy with your family, right? But that's not the case because 30 days doesn't make up for years of just like putting them through hell.
Mm-hmm.
How can you go about like building trust back with your family and kind of working towards like a solid relationship?
Can I add to that question?
Yeah.
And how can you go about positive communication as well? Just a little add in on that question.
Okay, no, that's completely fair.
Sorry, Mark.
I'm going to
Don't be
start with
sorry.
Mark's part, and then I'm hoping to end around you. So yeah, you're right in the fact that trust takes a really long time to rebuild. Like, it's not like I've heard the term come up more than once where loved ones are like, are they expecting me to give them a blank slate when you come home? I'm a firm believer that blank slates don't exist, because even if we're saying we're going to give you a blank slate, we still have resentments, we still have anger, we still have our feelings and our mistrust, whether we want to put it out in the open or not, right? And the thing with this is that in order to rebuild trust along the way, it's got to be a mutual effort between both family and the person in early recovery. The person in recovery, yes, you guys are shouldering the bulk of it, but as family members, we also need to show that we're trustworthy in being communicated to, in being supports. So it does work on both sides. Another stolen thing from Brene Brown, she actually broke down the anatomy of trust into an acronym, which she calls BRAVING. So B stands for boundaries. We need effective boundaries in our relationships in order to respect and show trust to one another. So it might be that there are boundaries being set of when we can communicate and how we can communicate in our time that we spend together, or it might be your loved one setting boundaries of who they can see when and how to protect themselves in their recovery, right? With these boundaries, it's really important that not only do we set them, but we also respect them, right? We have to respect other people's boundaries if we're expecting for our own to be upheld. R stands for reliability. We need to be reliable. If we're saying that we're making ourselves available to go get our kid from daycare every Tuesday and Thursday while our partner is working, we need to be reliable in being available to do that, right? If we are needed to do chores at home, or, to get some, finances in order, we need to be reliable in doing that. Okay. A goes along with reliable, which is accountable. We take responsibility for our successes, but also our challenges or failures, right? We're going to take our lumps where they're due. I'm sorry. I'm bringing it to your attention that I screwed up, but I'm taking responsibility. I'm taking accountability for it because I'm human and I make mistakes, right? That's a huge piece. We ask loved ones to give the accountability for recovery back to the person that's in recovery because we can't control it, right? And in order to have that accountability, you have to be able to say, yes, this is going really well, and no, this is going really badly, right? V stands for vault. We need to be the protectors of privacy on either side. So, and there's a big difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy, we have the right to a certain level of privacy in our life. We don't need to report to somebody everything that we're doing in the day. We don't need to tell them how many times we use the washroom or if we brushed our teeth, right? We have the right to protect some of the information that we talk about in our meetings or in our counseling sessions. But we don't have the right in secrecy of something that's going to be harmful to our family environment, harmful to ourselves, or harmful to other people, right? So that might be like the secrecy of, I'm going to tell you that I relapsed, but you can't tell anybody, right? That's allowing that secrecy within the family that's actually extremely toxic. Right? It can be that I will be the vault and I'm going to support you, but if you don't tell your loved ones that's going on, then I will have to bring it forward, right? So we can protect the privacy in that you can tell the information and be supported in doing so, but I'm not going to be a secret holder. I'm going to be a truth teller in this family, right? Vault mostly is pertaining to gossiping behaviors. So it might be that, honoring that it is your story to tell and not mine, right? It might be that, I know you're in treatment, but I'm not going to tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry that I passed on the street that you're in treatment, right? And vice versa. I stands for integrity. So living within our value systems. If I say that I believe in honesty and I'm going to be honest moving forward, then I need to live as honest of a life as humanly possible and try and uphold that in order to ensure that trust in the family unit, right? N stands for non-judgment. So we want to not be critical of other people, ensuring that we understand that others are human and to err is to human, and that we make a lot more headway with our loved ones and our family environments if we use empathy and understanding. Man, that's really hard. I'm sorry that you're there right now. How can I help you through this? The last one, G, is generosity. So not being generous in a material sense, it's being generous with time and communication. So communicating, for instance, understanding that my family members who previously struggled with policing behaviors as an adaptation to surviving the family unit may need to know on a more regular basis that I'm okay. It might mean that I'm doing more frequent check-ins, or I'm saying, hey, I had a really good meeting today and I took a lot away from it. Or, I'm going to my meetings 3 times a week, or I'm doing my counseling. Even though your loved one might not be bringing it up, you're saving them the question that might be asked. Understanding that, yeah, you have a right to privacy. But sometimes in order to get a little, we got to give a little first, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, that was incredible.
So,
Yeah,
so to answer your communication question, though, Jared.
Yeah, and I wanted to also add a little bit on that. Like, how important is it to not, use anger as well? Like, positive communication, I think, is the most important thing.
Mhm. So we've
But-
got 4 typical modes of communication that we use within a family environment. The first is passive communication. So we don't talk about our rights. We don't make a lot of decisions. We're typically quiet and we go with the flow and we don't challenge too much because we're afraid of conflict, and we often feel that others are wiser or more well versed in what I should be doing. A passive communicator uses a lot of should and ought to statements, right? The thing is that with a passive communicator, they're not talking about what their wants, needs, and feelings are. So their goals are often unmet. They feel like others in their life should be able to read their mind, and they're often really hurt that others can't perceive what they need. Um, and there's a high prevalence of anxiety, depression, and self-harming behaviors with those that are passive communicators. Then there's passive aggressive, which is passively angry. So these individuals, still expect you to know what they want without telling you, and they're going to try and give subtle cues that they're upset or that they want something without actually coming out and telling you what it is. So, this might be that the wife is angry that the husband left his socks all over the floor instead of in the hamper, but instead of telling him, she's going to stomp her feet as she goes to put them in the box and huff and puff. And she might, close the door to the bathroom a little bit harder than she should. Or she might hold out the silent treatment, not talk to him all day. Or she might go on strike. I'm not doing the dishes. I'm not cleaning the house anymore, because, she wants him to know that she's upset without actually having a direct conflict and trying to tell him what her needs are, right? Passive aggressive people, the goal is to get what they want without actually having to say what they want and avoid conflict. The outcome of passive aggressive communication, though, unfortunately, is that nobody likes passive aggressive communication, and we often feel like we're trapped on a hamster wheel and unable to escape the behavior. So it can be the cause for some pretty big blow-ups coming from the other side. And it tends to lead to people kind of distancing themselves from the individual.
I tend to be passive aggressive sometimes.
I think we all have passive aggressive tendencies, whether we want to admit it or not. I know I certainly.
Mark's laughing.
Yeah, I do too.
I remember that one group at Newgate. You said an answer, and they were like, "Oh, that was passive aggressive."
Yeah, it was. I do vividly.
I think I remember that actually. So the last one is, or the second last one, sorry, is aggressive. So we push ourselves forward with no regards for the rights or needs of anybody else. It's all about me when you're an aggressive communicator. At the end of the day, you're blaming, you're shaming, you're using use of intimidation, guilt tactics, a lot of accusations, a lot of finger pointing. Violence tends to stem in with an aggressive communicator, and if it's not violence, then it's a vocal violence, as I like to call it. So, that verbal aggression that comes out. Lots of stomping, yelling, smashing things, that sort of thing. At the end of the day, the goal is to win, to be powerful, and to get our own way. Aggressive communicators tend to have extremely low self-esteem. They tend to also have anxiety and depression. And there's also the prevalence of paranoia. So the reason that paranoia is present is because there's retaliation on the horizon when you're constantly taking from other people, right? So I'm always thinking that somebody's coming after what I have if I'm an aggressive communicator. At the end of the day, aggressive communicators are not well liked. They tend to be lonely and distanced from other people. But they also tend to be pretty powerful because people are fearful of aggressive communicators. At the end of the day, what we want to see families and those in early recovery to move towards is assertive communication. So with assertive communication, this is coming back to using those I statements, taking ownership for how I think and feel. I feel, I think, I see, right? So we're taking our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and taking ownership for them. We're taking responsibility for our shortcomings, and we're taking responsibility for our successes. As an assertive communicator, we work towards being comfortable accepting compliments and having conversation for the sake of communicating and not trying to manipulate or get our own way. So I might be asserting, my wants, needs, and feelings without an expectation that somebody agrees with me or is going to give me what I want, right? But understanding that, compromises might be needed. And in order for me to potentially get what I want, then I need to put it out there in an appropriate way first, right? Assertive communicators are willing to understand that their opinions are not necessarily always going to be agreed on, and that's fine. The intent is simply just to communicate, nothing more. What we see as an outcome with assertive communication is that there's actually much higher self-esteem with individuals that have assertive communication. We find that our goals are often met, and we have positive relationships with other people.
So last week we had a guest on, Tiffany Jenkins, and she said that she thought no one loved her anymore and she had no hope until her father came in and told her that he was getting sober because he had cancer. But I don't know, that kind of just made me think, what would you say to somebody that thinks they have no hope or no one out there?
It's really interesting because statistics show that most of those who are in active addiction are actually in contact with a family member at least once a week. But there's still that prevalence of family contact. And at times I think that it's a really true statement to feel so alone with your addiction and where things are at, and how far many have isolated themselves, that you don't necessarily feel like, your family is your greatest fan or that they understand where you're at or that you're still loved. Shame crops up and tells you there's no way that you can be loved. You're worthless. You've screwed up everything that you've touched. But at the root of it all, you are so loved. Oftentimes, for family members, setting those boundaries, trying to motivate you to make those changes, is coming from a place of such deep love and desperation for each one of you to get better. And at the end of the day, even if you don't necessarily feel the love from other people in your life, it doesn't mean that you're not going to find the love elsewhere. Recovery communities, the love for yourself, those are some of the most important pieces that you can ever find. And it's going to love you a hell of a lot better than your addiction of choice ever did. There is hope, there is love, and there is a future for each and every one of you.
That gave me goosebumps. Awesome answer. And then, sorry, and then I just have a little piggyback question. Now, what about for families that have no hope that their son, brother, sister, someone is ever going to try to recover or be in recovery or get better?
It can be a profoundly hopeless place to feel like you're in as a family member, especially when you've tried everything that you can possibly think of and your loved one's not making steps forward. Each person's at a completely different place in their journey. And I know there's this rhetoric in the community that you have to hit rock bottom before you can start building up. I'm a firm believer that there is no such thing as rock bottom, because even when you think you've hit it, you can still keep digging further down. Realistically, the only rock bottom that I see is death, right? So I think that there are a lot of moments in which families can reach out to additional resources or to tap into their own pieces of hope to be able to move that family unit forward. What we see is that family is one of the most or one of the biggest players in motivation for change in the addiction community. Um, and sometimes it does come to the point of like utilizing an interventionist to move forward, or it can be loving with boundaries and getting a little harsher with the consequences, and allowing your loved one to adapt to when their time might be. But in order for us to be effective helpers as family members, we need to practice that self-care and hold on to our optimism that things can get better and that hope is on the horizon, so that we can be ready to jump in and help our loved one move forward when their time comes up. One of the things that I like to look at, so like intervention services, I take a lot of calls at Newgate from loved ones asking like, how do I motivate my loved one? How do I help them move forward? And sometimes they've tried everything that they can possibly think of and we've thought of, except for using an interventionist. And it's a logical step for many, although it's not necessarily attainable for others, as you know, interventionists do typically carry a price tag, right? It's not widely available to every family. There are many that work on a sliding scale and will ask for a very, very tiny monetary donation to help a family, so that there's a little bit of skin in the game, a little bit of commitment, without breaking the bank. So being able to look for and utilize those services can be really helpful too. But if family members are looking at interventionists, it's really important to familiarize yourselves with the different types of intervention and what feels best for your family, as well as looking at the success rates, not just of the practitioner that you're working with, but also the model as a whole. And whether that's something that you're comfortable with, because statistics show that some models do work better as far as long-term recovery rates than what others do.
I had an interventionist actually, and that actually helped me get into Newgate. Catherine McDonald.
Mm-hmm.
She was amazing. She like talks to the whole family. It's kind of like a family interventionist, and
Yeah.
she like mediates the whole thing. It was it was amazing and really opens up your eyes.
She's an Arise interventionist, so she
Yeah.
yeah,
She'd be a great guest for this podcast as well.
she would be incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually just went through a workshop that leads up to an internship that I will be doing that kind of certifies me to do the same thing as Catherine. And the model is incredible because it works with the whole family, not just the person that's looking to make that change. There are different models. Like the Arise process is family informed and family driven versus other models that are kind of that surprise. You're getting an intervention and your bags are already packed and you're going today, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really important to look at the differences and what feels right and what's going to be successful. But yeah,
I think you'd do amazing at that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found Newgate really opened my eyes to how much your family is affected. And I remember we had one topic where, you know, addiction's so hard on everyone, but while we're being numbed from our substance, right? And our family didn't have that. So that kind of really put into perspective to me how much, you know, they went through. And I found that really cool about Newgate.
Yeah, it is. It's as you said, Mark. I mean, you guys are actively, when you're in an active addiction, you guys are kind of numbing out or avoiding and escaping certain emotions that you would typically be feeling. But the family is sober through all of that. They're seeing it all. They're feeling it all. They have, you know, the disappointment, the fear, the anxiety, the stress, the, you know, guilt, shame, regret. All of that is just constantly weighing on their shoulders, and it's so hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Talk about family and you know, maybe trying to get ahead of it. One question that Mark likes to ask is with the guests is kind of like related to you know, because he's having a little baby coming up soon, like discussing it with your children. whether it's kind of like your story of addiction and recovery, or whether it's just kind of talking about mental health and addiction. Is there any advice you have on approaching that when maybe the kids are at an age where they think they know everything? It's probably the age you're going to start talking to them about it. Like,
you mean that doesn't start early? I'm pretty sure my 3-year-old thinks he knows everything at this point.
Yeah, but like know everything and getting into trouble or whatever. But
yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think you need to assess where they're at, like, developmentally and cognitively, and whether you feel that they can handle the responses. But you're going to find the natural way within your own family environment that you're comfortable with and your level of exposure. But I'm a firm believer that the more honest we can be with our kids and helping them understand that there's that family link as well, and that puts them at a predisposition, it will help them make informed decisions and protect themselves. Experimentation in teenage years and those formative kind of settings, that was not the word I was looking for, but anyways, it's bound to happen. It's bound to happen. We can tell our kids that, no, you're not going to go to that party, and you're not going to drink, and you're not going to do that. But saying no typically isn't enough. They're going to find a will, or there's going to be a will, there's going to be a way, right? So at the end of the day, the more transparent that we can be and help them understand the risks as to why we don't want them to, the less likely they are to actually advance down that road. It's like the difference between telling a toddler, no, don't jump off of that table, and no, don't jump off the table because you will get hurt. If you just tell them no, they're going to do it. If you tell them why, they're going to think twice before they do it.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks,
I know this episode is going to help a lot of people, help a lot of families in need. So guys, if you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, make sure you reach out to someone, and give us a follow on all social media. Thank you very much for listening.
We'll have Newgate's contact info.
Absolutely.